Hey guys, I'm really excited about today's episode. I've written something really exciting, maybe my best historical story twist yet. So before you relax, take a moment to like the video and subscribe.
In the late 1670s, at the height of the Mughal Empire, a shadow moved quietly between worlds. From India's vast wealth to the rising colonies of North America, secret voyages and coded letters carried more than trade, they carried power. This was not a war of armies, but a silent exchange of ambition, knowledge, and betrayal. A forgotten story that quietly challenged empires. Chapter 1. Shadows of the Mughal Court. The sun had barely risen over the sprawling city of Agra, casting long golden shadows across the intricate marble carvings of the Mughal palaces. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the faint tang of the Yamuna River, which curved silently beneath the grand stone arches. Within the labyrinthine corridors of the imperial court, whispers moved faster than the courtiers themselves, carrying secrets that could topple ministers or elevate the lowliest servant to unimaginable heights. It was 1677, and Emperor Aurangzeb sat in the Diwan-i-Khas, the hall of private audience, surrounded by courtiers in flowing robes of silk and velvet, their eyes glinting with ambition. The emperor's face was a mask of austere composure, yet beneath that calm lay the restless calculations of a ruler determined to expand and secure his dominion. Every gesture, every word spoken in his presence was weighed for loyalty, cunning, and the slightest trace of dissent. Among the throng moved a man whose presence went largely unnoticed, not because he was insignificant, but because he had mastered the art of invisibility. Armand Qureshi, a merchant of modest means by appearance, carried secrets that could unsettle kings and emperors alike. To most, he was simply a trader of spices and silks, a bridge between India's bustling markets and the far reaches of Europe. But in truth, Armand's travels were not limited to commerce. His journeys stretched across oceans, and his eyes had seen the distant shores of a land few in the court even knew existed, the colonies of North America. Armand paused in the shadow of a column, observing the subtle interactions between ministers. Mirza Raja Jai Singh, the trusted general, whispered to a young scribe, whose ink-stained fingers betrayed his nervousness. Somewhere nearby, the emperor's chief eunuch orchestrated movements with precision, ensuring that none of the court's secrets slipped through unnoticed. Armand smiled faintly. He had learned that the greatest power in any empire was the ability to know without being known. That afternoon, Armand met with Rani Janahara, a woman of intellect and political astuteness who had long served as an advisor to the emperor. Though she walked the line of propriety, her influence was undeniable, and she had a reputation for reading intentions hidden beneath even the most practiced expressions. "Do you truly believe he suspects anything?" Armand asked in a low voice, careful not to attract attention. Janahara's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the hall before settling on him. "Suspicion is a luxury for those who do not understand the patterns of men," she said. "Aurangzeb sees what he wants to see and ignores what he cannot yet comprehend. That is why you are still alive, Armand. Your invisibility is your shield." Armand nodded, knowing her praise was tempered by warning. He had been tasked with a mission that few could imagine, the collection of intelligence and rare goods that could influence global trade and diplomacy. But the challenge was greater than he anticipated. Rumors had begun circulating that the Portuguese and the English East India Company were not content with their holdings in India. They were seeking alliances and secrets that could shift power across continents. As dusk approached, Armand slipped through the narrow corridors toward the riverbank, where a small boat awaited under the cover of dusk. His mind wandered to the distant lands across the ocean, the forests and rivers of Virginia, the bustling port of Boston, and the secretive societies that were beginning to form in the New World. It was a world of raw potential, where empires were young and ideas of freedom stirred beneath the surface, even if few realized it yet. In the boat, he unfurled a map, edges frayed from years of travel. Tiny marks indicated hidden ports, trading posts, and covert meeting points known only to a handful of merchants and diplomats. Each mark represented a choice, a risk, a possible betrayal. His fingers traced a line from Surat to the American colonies, imagining the routes that would carry silk, spices, and intelligence across oceans. The very thought sent a shiver of anticipation down his spine. But danger was never far. Pirates, rival traders, and imperial spies lurked in every port, ready to turn opportunity into disaster. One misstep could end not only his journey, but the delicate balance of alliances that stretched from the Mughal courts to the burgeoning towns of North America. That night, under the flickering lanterns along the Ghats, Arman met with a secret society of scholars and merchants who shared his vision. They called themselves the Veil of the East, a network of minds determined to gather knowledge, preserve treasures, and influence events beyond the reach of any one crown. Here, ideas were exchanged in hushed tones, the latest astronomical charts, maps of undiscovered lands, translations of foreign texts. Here, the seeds of transoceanic diplomacy were quietly planted. The months that followed saw Arman making voyages along the western coast of India, dispatching letters in code to allies he could barely trust, and navigating the treacherous waters of political intrigue. One letter, destined for a mysterious contact in Boston, outlined a strategy that could introduce Eastern goods and ideas into the American colonies without alerting European powers. The instructions were meticulous. Secure the shipment at Surat, transfer it via the Maldive currents, and finally through hidden coves along the New England coast. Even as he plotted these movements, Arman could not ignore the weight of history pressing upon him. The Mughal Empire, vast and resplendent, was a world apart from the raw, unsettled colonies of America. Yet he saw a strange symmetry in the ambitions of men on both sides of the ocean. Power, trade, loyalty, betrayal, these were constants, unchanged by geography or culture. And in the midst of this, he existed as a single thread connecting two worlds that might otherwise never meet. On a moonlit night, as the river reflected the delicate carvings of the palace walls, Arman paused to reflect. His mission was far from over. Letters would still cross oceans, alliances would form and dissolve, and secrets would continue to change hands in shadows. The court of Aurangzeb remained a place of splendor and danger, and the new world beckoned with the promise of untold opportunity. In the shadows of the Mughal court, Arman Qureshi smiled faintly. History was not written by emperors alone. Sometimes it was shaped by those who moved unseen, whose journeys spanned continents, and whose choices would ripple across oceans, influencing events yet to come in ways that no one could foresee. Across the ocean. The morning mist clung to the shores of Surat, muting the cries of merchants and the creak of timber as cargo boats were readied for the long voyage ahead. Arman Qureshi stood at the edge of the quay, adjusting the straps of his leather satchel and scanning the horizon where the Arabian Sea stretched endlessly toward the west. Beyond these familiar waters lay an unknown world, a land where whispers of opportunity and peril danced together like shadows in a candle-lit room. He had chosen the ship Horizon, a vessel owned by a clandestine network of merchants sympathetic to his cause. The captain, Thomas Gray, an Englishman with a scar running down his cheek and a past hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism, greeted him with a nod. "You're certain this cargo is discreet?" Gray asked, glancing at the crates of silks, spices, and the small chest marked only with Armand's personal sigil. Armand's lips curved into a faint smile. More than discreet, essential, and entirely invisible to those who do not know how to look. The crew, a mix of Portuguese, Indian, and a few Dutch sailors, moved with practiced efficiency. Yet beneath their calm, Armand sensed the tension. Secrets carried weight, and oceans could swallow even the most careful plans. As the ship departed, the coastline of India receded into a blur of green and brown, the palaces and markets of Surat shrinking until they were nothing more than a memory. Days passed with the rhythmic sway of the sea beneath them, and nights were spent under a canopy of stars so vast that even the most learned astronomers would struggle to map their constellations. Armand used these nights to study charts and scribble in his journal, detailing currents, trade winds, and secret coves along the American coastline he had learned of through scattered reports from colonial traders. By the fourth week, the voyage had settled into a rhythm. The cries of gulls at dawn, the scent of salt in the air, and the endless horizon stretching before them. Yet the sea was a cunning adversary. One evening, a storm rolled in without warning, waves crashing against the wooden hull as if testing the resolve of those aboard. Sailors shouted over the roar, securing sails and tying down cargo. Armand, hands gripping the railing, felt the weight of centuries of ambition pressing against him. A misstep here, a damaged crate there, and the fragile chain linking Mughal wealth to the New World could be severed forever. When the calm returned, a new world unfolded on the horizon. The ship approached the Caribbean islands, stepping stones on the long journey to the northern colonies. Pirates prowled these waters, and Armand remained vigilant. The islands themselves were a kaleidoscope of color, palm trees swaying against turquoise waters, settlements built hastily but bustling with activity, and the occasional glint of European flags fluttering in the sun. It was in one of these harbors, on the island of St. Kitts, that Armand encountered his first American contact. Ezekiel Hawthorne, a wiry man with sun-darkened skin and eyes sharp as a hawk, had been instructed to meet any trader bearing the sigil of the Vale of the East. "You're late," Ezekiel said, voice low and wary, as Armand disembarked under the cover of dusk. Time is a luxury the ocean does not afford, and secrecy even less so. The crew, a mix of Portuguese, Indian, and a few Dutch sailors, moved with practiced efficiency. Yet beneath their calm, Armand sensed the tension. Secrets carried weight, and oceans could swallow even the most careful plans. From the Caribbean, the horizon pressed northward, tracing a path along the eastern seaboard of North America. The first glimpse of the American colonies struck Armand with a mix of wonder and calculation. Forests stretched endlessly, rivers carved deep channels through the land, and the settlements, though modest compared to India's grandeur, bustled with energy. Here, commerce, politics, and ambition mingled freely, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the Mughal court. In Virginia, Armand walked through the docks of Jamestown, observing the loading of tobacco onto ships bound for Europe. He marveled at the efficiency and audacity of these young colonies, built from the determination of men and women willing to endure hardship for opportunity. But opportunity, he knew, could be exploited. With careful planning, he could introduce Eastern spices, silks, and even ideas to this burgeoning land, shaping trade networks before European powers fully established control. He met with colonial merchants, forming alliances under the pretense of simple trade. To them, he was a wealthy Indian trader with exotic goods. To himself, he was a thread weaving together distant worlds. In taverns, letters changed hands, maps were discreetly consulted, and secret meetings were scheduled in barns and abandoned warehouses. Every interaction was a delicate balance. One wrong word, one mistrusted gesture, and the entire network could unravel. Yet the greatest challenge lay not in trade, but in understanding the people. The colonists were driven by ideals that seemed foreign yet familiar: freedom, opportunity, self-determination. Arman observed quietly, taking notes, sensing the potential for ideas to grow and spread in ways that could influence the distant Mughal Empire itself. It was a paradox, the strength of a rigid empire meeting the dynamism of a fledgling society. Winter approached, and with it new challenges. The Atlantic grew turbulent, storms became more frequent, and the colonies prepared for the harsh months ahead. Arman's mission required adaptation. Secret shipments needed careful timing, contacts had to remain discreet, and the ever-present threat of discovery by European powers loomed. In Boston, he finally met Rebecca Sinclair, a scholar and linguist who had taken interest in the knowledge and cultures of the East. Rebecca's curiosity was insatiable. She listened intently as Arman described the Mughal courts, the intricacies of Indian trade, and the celestial charts guiding his voyages. Through her, he began to plant seeds of cultural exchange that might one day grow into something far beyond trade, a bridge of ideas, a shared understanding across continents. As the first snow fell over Boston's rooftops, Arman realized the journey had only just begun. Each step, each shipment, each whispered secret was a thread in a tapestry that stretched from the opulent halls of Agra to the rugged shores of New England. The oceans, vast and indifferent, connected worlds that history might never have brought together without him. In the quiet hours of the night, he penned a final letter for this voyage, sealed it with his personal sigil, and entrusted it to a trusted courier. The letter contained directions for the next stage of trade, intelligence about European movements, and subtle guidance for allies in the colonies. It was a small act, yet one with consequences he could not yet predict. The voyage across the ocean had changed him. The world was larger, more complex, and more intertwined than he had ever imagined. And as the horizon prepared for its return journey to India, Arman understood one immutable truth: empires rise and fall, rulers wield power, but ideas, trade, and secrets move faster than armies, shaping history in ways even emperors cannot foresee.
The Merchant's Secret. The winter frost lingered over Boston as Arman Qureshi moved through the narrow alleys, his breath visible in the cold air. In the colonial settlements, commerce was a dance of discretion and ambition, where every handshake might conceal a betrayal, and every transaction could shift the balance of power across oceans. Arman understood this well. For months, he had been establishing his network, an intricate web connecting India's opulent ports with the young, restless colonies of North America. In a hidden cellar beneath an unassuming tavern, Arman convened with his closest associates. Ezekiel Hawthorne and Rebecca Sinclair stood across from him, maps and ledgers spread across a worn wooden table. The flickering lanterns cast dancing shadows, illuminating the meticulous arrangements of crates and letters. Each item in the shipment, from golden muslin fabrics to rare spices like saffron and cardamom, was chosen for its strategic value. "This shipment must arrive intact," Arman said, voice low and deliberate. "The French and the Portuguese are not idle. Every crate that reaches the colonies strengthens our position. Every loss could set us back years."
Ezekiel nodded, tracing a route along the eastern coast with a finger. There are coves along Cape Cod and hidden in Long Island Sound. If the storms hold, we can move the cargo without attracting attention. Rebecca, ever inquisitive, added, "And the letters, the intelligence you've gathered from India?" "Encrypted," Arman replied. "Only our network can read them. European powers think they control the seas, but the truth is that information flows faster than fleets." The task was monumental. Each shipment required careful timing, trusted intermediaries, and the constant calculation of risk. Pirates prowled the waters, eager to seize riches, while rival merchants, both European and local, watched with suspicion, ready to exploit any mistake. In Surat, months earlier, Arman had dispatched a series of coded letters detailing European alliances, the schedules of Portuguese caravans, and movements of English trading ships. Now, in Boston, the fruits of that intelligence had begun to emerge. Local merchants, guided discreetly by Arman's insights, were able to anticipate shortages, acquire rare goods, and establish dominance in markets previously inaccessible.
But trade was not the only concern. Political tensions simmered, both in India and the colonies. Arman knew that a single misstep, a misread letter, a careless conversation, or a betrayal within his own network could jeopardize everything. To mitigate this, he had recruited a cadre of operatives skilled in observation, persuasion, and the subtle art of deception. They moved quietly through the streets and ports, unnoticed yet ever vigilant. One evening, as a thick fog rolled in from the harbor, Arman met with Captain Laurent de Montfort, a French trader whose allegiance was as fluid as the tides. The meeting took place aboard a moored vessel, hidden from view by the mist. De Montfort's reputation preceded him. Cunning, ruthless, and well-connected, he had the potential to be both ally and adversary. "Your goods intrigue me," de Montfort said, his eyes glinting with calculation. "Rare spices, silks, knowledge of the East. But what guarantee do I have that you are not playing a game beyond my understanding?" Arman leaned in, voice steady. "I offer opportunity, not certainty. What you do with it is your choice. Align wisely and the benefits are immense. Misstep and you learn nothing but loss." De Montfort studied him, then nodded slightly. "I will observe, for now." Arman knew the Frenchman's caution was both a blessing and a curse. Allies in trade were valuable, but even temporary alliances required constant monitoring. In the world of covert commerce, trust was a currency more fragile than gold. Back on land, Arman's network expanded into unexpected territories. He enlisted scholars, sailors, and even colonial officials, all of whom contributed in ways that remained invisible to the outside world. The flow of goods and intelligence became a lifeline connecting India's wealth with the potential of the New World. Exotic fabrics were repurposed into symbols of status among colonial elites. Spices influenced culinary trends, and rare texts began to circulate in the hands of those curious about the East. Yet with every success came new risks. The English East India Company had begun to suspect that unusual shipments were making their way to the colonies, bypassing their oversight. Agents were dispatched to investigate, and spies attempted to intercept letters and cargo. Arman responded with countermeasures: false manifests, coded messages hidden in mundane correspondence, and decoy shipments designed to mislead prying eyes. One night, under the glow of a crescent moon, Arman reflected on the delicate balance he maintained. The Mughal Empire, with its rigid hierarchy and opulent palaces, seemed worlds apart from the chaotic energy of the colonies. Yet both demanded vigilance, strategy, and the courage to act unseen.
Every decision he made carried weight. The success of his network, the safety of his associates, and the potential influence on events yet to unfold in the colonies and back in India. The narrative of trade, however, was only one layer. Armand understood that ideas traveled faster than ships, and the colonies were fertile ground for influence. He began to introduce concepts of governance, negotiation, and commerce in subtle ways, planting seeds that might grow into movements unforeseen by European powers. These efforts required patience, discretion, and a keen understanding of human nature. During a particularly tense week, a shipment carrying rare textiles and Eastern manuscripts was intercepted near Newport, Rhode Island. Armand, having anticipated such an event, had already arranged for duplicates to continue to the intended recipients. The intelligence he had collected allowed him to adjust routes, secure contacts, and maintain the integrity of his network without drawing attention. Through these maneuvers, Armand became more than a merchant. He was a strategist, a bridge between worlds, and a quiet architect of influence. The colonies, while outwardly independent and chaotic, were beginning to feel the subtle imprint of his efforts. Markets shifted, alliances formed, and the flow of information created a hidden current, shaping decisions far beyond the reach of any single empire. By the end of the season, Armand's network was firmly established. His shipments reached intended recipients. His coded letters conveyed intelligence undetected, and his alliances, though fragile, offered a platform for future operations. Yet he remained ever aware of the precariousness of his position. Rival merchants, European powers, and even disloyal alliances posed constant threats. Success was temporary, and vigilance was eternal. As the winter melted into spring, Armand looked toward the horizon once more. The world was vast, and opportunity stretched across oceans and continents. He had woven a tapestry of trade and intelligence connecting India to the New World, yet countless threads remained to be tied. The merchant's secret was no longer a mere enterprise of commerce. It was a living, breathing entity influencing events in ways few could perceive. And so, as the sun rose over Boston Harbor, casting light on ships and warehouses, Armand Qureshi prepared for the next stage of his plan. The European powers were vigilant, the colonies restless, and the Mughal court far across the sea remained a distant yet constant presence in his mind. He understood that the true test of his network was only beginning, and that every shipment, every letter, and every alliance would shape history in ways still invisible to the world.
Letters in the wind. The spring wind carried a chill along the streets of Boston, rustling the edges of parchment and scattering the faint scent of salt from the harbor. In a hidden attic above a modest townhouse, Armand Qureshi hunched over a desk, quill in hand, ink-stained fingers tracing intricate symbols across parchment. Each letter he penned was a ciphered thread, linking the Mughal Empire to the New World, connecting traders, scholars, and spies across continents. Armand understood the delicate art of communication. A letter in plain sight could be read by anyone. A ciphered letter, by contrast, became a fortress, visible only to those who held the key. The risks were immense. European powers were vigilant, and rival merchants and even colonial authorities were eager to intercept intelligence that could give them an advantage. One misstep could unravel months of careful planning. Tonight, he was preparing correspondence for 3 key recipients: a contact in Surat overseeing trade, a scholar in Delhi monitoring political shifts, and a colonial merchant in Philadelphia who had proven both trustworthy and discreet.
Each letter contained intelligence tailored to the recipient's role, shipment schedules, coded warnings, subtle guidance for alliances, and observations about the shifting tides of power. As Armand wrote, he reflected on the ingenuity required to maintain such a network. His letters were not merely messages, they were instruments of influence. He included invisible ink, hidden compartments, and seemingly innocuous flourishes that masked critical information. Even the choice of paper and seal was calculated to evade detection. In the wrong hands, a single letter could expose entire networks and imperil lives. In the streets below, couriers moved like shadows, delivering mundane correspondence while carrying Armand's hidden messages. They were skilled in misdirection, blending into marketplaces, taverns, and crowded wharves. Each courier knew the weight of their task. A delay, a mistake, or a betrayal could shift the balance of power between continents. One such courier, a young man named Samuel Whitaker, approached the tavern where colonial merchants gathered, his leather satchel hidden beneath a cloak. He moved with practiced ease, exchanging letters with a nod and a whispered phrase. To the untrained eye, he was just another messenger. To those in the network, he was a lifeline. Meanwhile, Armand received intelligence from Calcutta, conveyed through coded letters and trusted intermediaries. Reports indicated that the Portuguese were increasing their presence along the western coast of India, that French traders were attempting to establish covert alliances in Bengal, and that subtle unrest in the Mughal court could be leveraged for strategic advantage. Each piece of information informed his decisions across the ocean, shaping the flow of goods, ideas, and alliances. The complexity of Armand's network required careful orchestration. In addition to merchants and scholars, he relied on spies embedded in European trading companies. These individuals, sailors, clerks, and even minor officials provided insight into shipping schedules, market trends, and political developments. Their loyalty was secured not only by payment, but by the trust Armand cultivated, a rare commodity in a world defined by suspicion. One evening, as a storm brewed over the harbor, Armand convened with Rebecca Sinclair and Ezekiel Hawthorne. The room smelled of rain and ink, lanterns casting shadows that flickered like the movements of unseen watchers.
"We've received reports that a shipment bound for Philadelphia has been tampered with," Ezekiel said, eyes sharp and alert. Armand frowned. "Tampered or intercepted?" Rebecca shook her head. "Unclear. The seals were broken, but no goods are missing. Someone wanted us to know they were watching." Armand considered the implications. European powers were aware of unusual movements, and rival merchants were testing the network's vulnerabilities. He began drafting contingency plans, alternative routes, decoy shipments, and additional ciphers to ensure that critical intelligence could reach its destination undetected. The next day, a letter disguised as a mundane trade correspondence was dispatched to Surat. Beneath the ink of ordinary requests lay a carefully encoded message, instructions for rerouting spice shipments, warnings about European fleet movements, and subtle guidance for local allies. The letter would pass through multiple hands before reaching its intended recipient, each courier unaware of the hidden content they carried. In parallel, Armand cultivated a network of colonial informants, farmers, merchants, and sailors, all attuned to the rhythms of trade and politics, provided snippets of information that, when pieced together, created a comprehensive picture of the evolving landscape. Armand cross-referenced these reports with intelligence from India, refining strategies and anticipating threats before they emerged. As weeks turned into months, the network grew in sophistication. Letters traveled across the Atlantic with increasing precision, carrying intelligence, guidance, and subtle influence. Armin had transformed trade into an instrument of espionage, commerce into a conduit for shaping events on both sides of the ocean. The merchant who had once been a silent observer had become a strategist, a weaver of webs invisible to all but those who knew how to look. Yet danger was never far. One afternoon, a letter intended for a colonial contact went missing. Armin's network activated swiftly. A duplicate was dispatched, a decoy letter sent to mislead potential interceptors, and a series of coded messages were prepared to verify the integrity of the information. By nightfall, the missing correspondence had been accounted for, and no critical intelligence had been compromised. Through these measures, Armin realized the true power of his position. He was no longer merely a trader. He was a node in a transoceanic network of influence. The letters in his hand carried the potential to shift markets, alter alliances, and even sway political decisions. Each decision he made rippled outward, affecting lives and empires in ways invisible to the casual observer. By the time spring fully emerged, Boston's harbor bustled with activity, ships arriving and departing, goods exchanged, and rumors spreading with the wind. Armin continued his meticulous work, drafting letters, coordinating couriers, and refining ciphers. The network was a living organism, adapting to threats, seizing opportunities, and shaping events far beyond the eyes of emperors and governors. Late one night, as Armin sealed a particularly sensitive letter with his personal sigil, he paused to reflect. Across oceans and continents, empires clashed and commerce thrived, yet it was the silent movement of letters, the subtle transfer of information, and the careful orchestration of allies that truly shaped history. In the shadows of the colonial streets and Mughal palaces, Armin Qureshi had become more than a merchant. He had become a silent architect of influence, writing history in ink and secrecy.
Treasure beneath the waves. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before the horizon, waves glinting silver under a pale morning sun. Armin Qureshi stood at the bow, the wind tugging at his coat, eyes scanning the horizon for threats that might appear with the turn of a wave. For months he had navigated treacherous waters, connecting ports from India to the New World, orchestrating a network of trade and intelligence invisible to the empires that claimed dominion over the seas. But the ocean was no passive stage. It demanded vigilance, respect, and cunning. Pirates, opportunistic privateers, and rival traders roamed these waters, ready to seize riches and disrupt carefully laid plans. Armin knew that some of the most critical treasures, the ones with strategic as well as material value, were hidden beneath the waves, in coves, bays, and secret inlets mapped only by the Veil of the East. The day began with a meeting on deck. Captain Thomas Gray, the Horizon's seasoned navigator, approached Armin with a concerned look. "There's word of a French corsair prowling near the Chesapeake," Gray said, his voice low. "She's fast, armed, and looking for prey. Any sign of her and we'll need to divert or risk capture." Armin considered the information carefully. A diversion could delay shipments and complicate alliances, but confrontation could risk the loss of goods, intelligence, and lives. "We will skirt the coast, avoid open channels, and use hidden inlets," he instructed. "Prepare the crew for long hours and keep the cargo secure. Every chest, every letter must remain intact." The Horizon veered from the main shipping lanes, weaving through rocky outcroppings and shallow bays known only to a handful of trusted sailors. Armin relied on charts he had painstakingly assembled, drawing from ancient maps, intelligence gathered from merchants, and secret knowledge passed down through the Veil of the East. Every curve of the coastline, every hidden cove, could mean the difference between safety and disaster. At night, as lanterns flickered across the deck, Armand gathered his trusted lieutenants, Ezekiel, Rebecca, and a small group of skilled sailors. He explained the next operation. A hidden cache of silks, spices, and manuscripts was buried along a remote inlet in New England, intended to bypass colonial customs and European oversight. Only a few knew its location, and its discovery by the wrong hands could compromise the entire network. The landing was executed with precision. Under the cover of darkness, they rowed small boats to the inlet, each stroke silent and deliberate. Rebecca led the team in decoding symbols etched on rocks and driftwood, markers that indicated the cache's exact location. Ezekiel helped lift crates carefully, ensuring that nothing was damaged or exposed to the elements. The work was slow, laborious, but meticulous. Any mistake could prove catastrophic.
As dawn approached, they returned to the horizon with the recovered cargo. Armand inspected each crate, confirming the integrity of the goods and the documents concealed within. The sense of relief was tempered by the knowledge that dangers were ever present. Rumors of European inspection, pirate activity, and rival traders were constant reminders that the sea was a battlefield where information, not just cannon fire, could determine victory. Weeks later, as the Horizon navigated the Caribbean Sea, they encountered a genuine threat. A notorious pirate vessel, the Crimson Marauder, emerged from the mist, black sails flapping ominously in the wind. Its captain, a ruthless man named Jean-Baptiste Lafitte, was known for both cunning and cruelty. Armand and Captain Gray acted swiftly, employing decoy maneuvers, false signals, and the cover of early morning fog to evade confrontation. Yet even in evasion, lessons were learned. Armand observed the patterns of pirate behavior, noting which coves they favored, how they gathered intelligence, and the weaknesses in their coordination. Every encounter, whether avoided or survived, became data, a means to strengthen his network, anticipate future threats, and ensure the safe passage of goods and intelligence across the Atlantic. Beyond pirates, the ocean itself was a formidable adversary. Storms, unpredictable currents, and hidden shoals tested the crew daily. On one harrowing night, a sudden squall nearly capsized the Horizon. Waves towered over the deck, and crew members clung desperately as lightning illuminated the tempest. Armand's calm leadership, honed through years of navigating political and commercial storms, guided them through the chaos. By dawn, the Horizon had survived, but the crew's exhaustion and the toll on the ship were stark reminders that the ocean demanded respect. In calmer waters, Armand focused on the strategic placement of further caches. Along the coast of Virginia, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, secret stashes were arranged to allow the discreet transfer of goods, intelligence, and letters. Each cache was designed to be found only by those in the network, often hidden beneath rocks, in hollowed-out trees, or behind false walls in abandoned warehouses. The operation required precision, memory, and trust. A single leak could jeopardize months of work. The greatest treasures, however, were not silks or spices, but knowledge. Armand had arranged for rare manuscripts, astronomical charts, and maps from India to travel alongside trade goods, providing colonial scholars with insights previously unknown in the New World. The subtle dissemination of ideas, mathematical techniques, architectural designs, and cultural practices began to shape colonial understanding, laying foundations that would resonate for generations. During a particularly tense operation near Cape Cod, the crew discovered signs of a rival European agent surveying the area. Armand acted decisively, relocating the cache and planting misleading markers to confuse the observer. By the time the rival returned, the trail had vanished. Such maneuvers were emblematic of the constant cat-and-mouse game Armand orchestrated across the seas, a combination of strategy, intuition, and meticulous planning. Even in moments of success, Armand remained vigilant.
Every crate, every letter, and every encounter was an opportunity for discovery or betrayal. He trained his couriers, briefed his allies, and refined his strategies, understanding that the balance of power depended on the quiet mastery of these unseen operations. By the season's end, the horizon had completed its circuit, caches secured, shipments delivered, and intelligence transmitted. Armand reflected on the months at sea, the perils of piracy, the unpredictability of storms, and the intricate dance of trade and espionage that defined his mission. Each success reinforced the fragile web connecting India to the New World, and each challenge underscored the stakes of failure. As the horizon sailed towards Boston, the first hints of spring warmed the air. The oceans had tested him, the seas had challenged him, and the hidden treasures beneath the waves had proven both valuable and perilous. Armand Qureshi knew that the ocean was not merely a medium of transport, but a living entity, shaping events, testing loyalty, and guarding secrets that only the vigilant could uncover. In the quiet of the night, under a sky blanketed with stars, Armand looked out over the water. He imagined the shores of India, the palaces of Agra, and the bustling ports of Surat, knowing that all were connected in a tapestry of trade, intelligence, and ambition. The sea had become both ally and adversary, a conduit for wealth and knowledge, and a proving ground for the silent architect shaping history from the shadows.
Alliances and betrayals. The spring sun glimmered over Philadelphia, painting the cobblestone streets with warm gold. Yet beneath the beauty of the city lay a network of intrigue as intricate as any Mughal court. Armand Qureshi moved among merchants, scholars, and colonial officials, his eyes sharp, ever aware of the invisible threads connecting ambition and opportunity. His success in trade and intelligence had not gone unnoticed, and both allies and rivals now circled like predators, seeking advantage. Armand had long understood the delicate balance of trust. Alliances were temporary, shifting with tides of profit, loyalty, and fear. A misstep could sever connections, spark betrayal, or alert European powers to the clandestine operations flowing between India and the New World. His first meeting of the day was with Governor Samuel Randolph, a man whose reputation for shrewd negotiation matched his ambition. Armand entered the governor's private chambers under the guise of discussing trade, yet the conversation swiftly pivoted toward political and strategic matters. "The East is no longer a distant curiosity," Armand began, his tone measured. "It influences everything, from the flow of wealth to the movement of fleets. Knowledge, not gold alone, determines who holds power." Randolph's eyes narrowed, a flicker of intrigue mixed with caution. "And you bring this knowledge to me?" Armand nodded. "Selective, strategic. It is the key to maintaining advantage in an increasingly interconnected world." By the afternoon, Armand convened with a network of colonial merchants, European agents, and a few trusted scholars. Each had something to offer: information about rival fleets, intelligence on hidden ports, or access to rare commodities. They gathered in a discreet warehouse, maps and letters scattered across tables, lanterns flickering as shadows danced across their faces. Armand spoke carefully. "Every shipment, every letter, every alliance we form is part of a greater strategy. But remember, betrayal can come from any side. We must be vigilant, constantly verifying loyalties." It was a warning well placed. Among those present was Jean-Baptiste Lafitte, the pirate Armand had evaded months earlier, now posing as a merchant with claims of neutrality. Lafitte's charm and apparent compliance concealed a calculating mind, and Armand treated him with cautious respect. Meanwhile, letters from India signaled shifts in the Mughal court. Aurangzeb's ministers were growing restless, rivalries among nobles intensifying.
Reports of bribed officials, intercepted shipments, and clandestine negotiations provided Armand with opportunities to leverage the situation. He realized that influence could be exerted not only through trade, but also by careful manipulation of alliances and rivalries. In the weeks that followed, Armand orchestrated a series of covert maneuvers. He arranged simultaneous shipments of silks and spices to multiple ports, confusing rival European traders and testing the loyalty of his network. He dispatched letters encoded with false routes, intended to mislead those who might be observing. Each move was calculated to reveal the reliability of allies and expose potential threats. One night, Armand discovered evidence of betrayal. A letter meant for a trusted contact in Boston had been intercepted and copied. His instincts told him that someone within the colonial merchants' network had been compromised, perhaps coerced, perhaps enticed by profit. The realization sent a ripple of caution through his operations. He convened a secret meeting with Ezekiel and Rebecca. "We have been watched," he said gravely. "The interception is evidence that our network is vulnerable. We must identify the source and act decisively." Rebecca, ever the scholar, examined the letters carefully. "The cipher has been tampered with subtly. Only someone familiar with our methods could manage this." Armand nodded. "Exactly. We must treat everyone as potential risk until we verify loyalty." The next days were filled with careful observation, testing alliances, and subtle probing. Couriers were rotated, routes changed, and decoys placed to monitor reactions. Slowly, the traitor revealed themselves, a minor merchant eager for gain, who had been feeding information to French traders. Armand dealt with the betrayal quietly, severing ties and neutralizing threats without alerting others. Meanwhile, European powers escalated their own maneuvers. English, French, and Portuguese agents competed to control trade, influence local governance, and secure rare goods from India. Each maneuver presented Armand with both danger and opportunity. By anticipating rival moves, he was able to turn potential threats into strategic advantages. In one daring operation, Armand arranged a fake shipment destined for Newport, complete with misleading letters and decoy crates. European observers were drawn to the diversion, leaving the actual cargo free to reach Philadelphia safely. It was a triumph of deception, patience, and foresight, a testament to the growing sophistication of his network. The political intrigue extended beyond the colonies. Armand maintained contact with ministers in the Mughal court, leveraging rivalries among nobles to secure priority for shipments, access to intelligence, and protection for his merchants. By subtly influencing both Mughal and colonial officials, he created a delicate balance of power that ensured the continued success of his operations. Yet Armand never allowed himself complacency. Every alliance was provisional, every gesture of loyalty subject to verification. Betrayal, he understood, was inevitable in a world defined by ambition and opportunity. What mattered was the ability to anticipate it, control its impact, and use it to strengthen one's own position. By late summer, Armand's web of influence stretched from India's bustling ports to the colony's nascent cities. His careful orchestration of alliances, shipments, and intelligence had created a network that rivals could not easily dismantle. Traders, scholars, and officials, all unknowingly part of a grand design, moved according to patterns Armand had established, advancing his goals while concealing his hand. As he stood on a balcony overlooking the harbor, Armand reflected on the delicate interplay of trust and deception that defined his world. The ocean had been navigated, treasures secured, letters delivered, and alliances forged. But the game was far from over. Political intrigue and shifting loyalties would continue to challenge him, and the stakes would only grow higher. Yet Arman remained resolute. He understood that history was shaped not only by kings and emperors, but by those who moved unseen, weaving threads of influence, strategy, and vision across continents. Alliances and betrayals were merely instruments in a larger symphony, each note contributing to the unfolding story of commerce, power, and ambition that stretched from the palaces of Agra to the colonial harbors of North America. The American Connection. Autumn arrived in the colonies, painting the forests in fiery reds and golds, as Armand Qureshi walked the quiet streets of Philadelphia, careful to avoid the casual gaze of passers-by. The city hummed with the energy of commerce, debate, and ideas, its taverns and meeting halls echoing with conversations that would one day shape a new world. For Armand, the challenge was subtle: influence without exposure, guidance without interference, and knowledge without detection. He was no longer merely a merchant or a strategist of trade. He had become a bridge between continents, a silent force shaping thought in ways few could perceive. The ideas he carried, the philosophies, cultural insights, and intellectual currents of India and the Mughal Empire found fertile ground among scholars, merchants, and early leaders in the colonies. Armand's first secret meeting was with Samuel Adams, a man whose passion for self-governance was matched only by his keen understanding of politics. They met in the back room of a modest tavern, the murmur of patrons shielding their conversation. Armand shared knowledge of administrative systems in India, particularly the Mughal Empire's complex bureaucracy and revenue networks. "You speak of governance with such structure," said Adams thoughtfully, "yet it seems adaptable, capable of accommodating vast territories and diverse peoples. How does one ensure loyalty without tyranny?" Armand leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "Structure is only part of the equation. Understanding human ambition, expectations, and relationships is the key. Power flows not just from edicts, but from perception and trust." Across the colonies, Armand met scholars and merchants, planting seeds of curiosity about the East. Manuscripts detailing astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and trade practices moved quietly among the learned circles, hidden in simple sight. Through these exchanges, he subtly influenced thinking, encouraging an openness to ideas and methods that would one day contribute to innovation and independent thought. Yet the colonies were not without tension. European powers continued to maneuver, suspicious of unusual shipments and clandestine gatherings. Armand responded by further diversifying his network, establishing multiple layers of couriers, decoys, and intermediaries. Knowledge traveled along these invisible threads, shaping decisions and strategies without revealing the origin of influence. In Boston, Armand convened a meeting with Reverend Jonathan Edwards, a scholar interested in both philosophy and science. Armand shared insights into Indian mathematics, celestial navigation, and trade systems. "The world is larger than any empire alone," he explained. "Understanding distant lands allows one to predict, negotiate, and prosper." Edwards, intrigued, saw the broader implications. These ideas, they could transform how we think about commerce, governance, even education. Armand nodded. And yet, exposure must be gradual. Too much knowledge too soon attracts attention.
Meanwhile, letters from India continued to arrive, providing intelligence on Mughal court affairs and European maneuvers. Armand coordinated shipments of manuscripts, textiles, and spices, ensuring that critical materials reached colonial allies discreetly. Each item,
Each letter reinforced a subtle web of influence that bridged continents. One particularly sensitive operation involved the transport of a rare astronomical manuscript from Surat to Boston. Armand coordinated the voyage personally, navigating hidden coves, evading European agents, and using trusted couriers to secure the delivery. Upon arrival, the manuscript was placed with a group of colonial scholars who studied it in secrecy, unaware of the network that had ensured its safe passage. Armand also fostered relationships with colonial artisans, introducing techniques in weaving, dyeing, and architecture inspired by Indian methods. These cultural exchanges enriched the colonies while further weaving Armand's influence into the fabric of society. Even the smallest innovation, a method for fabric treatment, a new trade route, or a philosophical discussion, was part of a deliberate strategy to encourage resilience, adaptability, and foresight. In Philadelphia, he orchestrated a clandestine meeting between colonial merchants and a traveling emissary from India. Under the guise of a trade negotiation, ideas of governance, trade policy, and strategic alliances were discussed, creating channels of understanding that would endure beyond the immediate operations. These meetings were carefully documented in code, ensuring that intelligence traveled safely across oceans. Yet not all was smooth. Rival European agents attempted to infiltrate his network, offering bribes, spreading rumors, and observing movements of goods and letters. Armand anticipated each move, countering with decoys, alternate routes, and coded communications designed to expose deception. Loyalty, he had learned, was earned through careful testing and consistent strategy. As winter approached, Armand took stock of his achievements. Trade networks were secure, intelligence flows were uninterrupted, and ideas, both practical and philosophical, had taken root among a growing circle of colonial allies. The seeds of cross-continental collaboration, inspired by Mughal administrative and cultural practices, had begun to influence thinking in ways subtle yet profound. One evening, as he walked along the banks of the Delaware River, the lights of the city reflecting on the water, Armand reflected on the broader significance of his work. The colonies were a land of potential, where ideas, trade, and ambition intersected. By connecting India and the New World, he had created a conduit of influence that transcended empires, geography, and time. He understood that history was shaped not only by armies and monarchs, but by those who moved unseen, guiding knowledge, facilitating exchange, and orchestrating strategy across continents. His role was silent, invisible to the world, yet the ripples of his actions would extend far into the future. Armand Qureshi's influence in the colonies, his careful cultivation of relationships, and his introduction of ideas from India represented a subtle revolution, not yet a war, not yet a declaration, but the beginnings of thought, strategy, and innovation that would one day shape the destiny of nations. As the night deepened and lanterns glimmered along the waterfront, Armand sealed a new set of letters and entrusted them to his most reliable couriers. Each letter carried intelligence, guidance, and cultural insight, bridging continents, influencing decisions, and weaving a network that only he could see in its entirety. In the quiet moments before sleep, Armand gazed at the stars, imagining the oceans between India and the New World. The paths he had charted, the networks he had established, and the influence he had sown were invisible to all but those who understood the subtle currents of power and knowledge. History, he knew, was often written in silence, in whispers, and in letters carried by wind and wave. And in that silence, Armand Qureshi smiled, knowing that the American connection he nurtured would resonate far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the future in ways few could yet comprehend.
Shadows of conspiracy. The autumn winds brought an eerie chill to Boston, carrying with them whispers of intrigue and the scent of smoldering ambition. Armand Qureshi moved through the streets with measured steps, aware that each shadow could conceal an enemy, each handshake could mask duplicity. Across the colonies, rival European powers, English, French, and Portuguese, had begun to recognize that the quiet merchant from India was no ordinary trader. His network of intelligence, trade, and influence had begun to shift the balance in ways that neither crown nor governor could fully comprehend. In a dimly lit chamber, Armand convened with Ezekiel Hawthorne and Rebecca Sinclair. Maps, coded letters, and shipment logs were spread across the table. Lanterns flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters against the walls. "The French are moving faster than anticipated," Ezekiel said, his voice tight with concern. "Reports suggest they've embedded agents within multiple ports along the coast. They're trying to map our routes and identify our cachets." Armand nodded, eyes narrowing. "And the English? Have they taken notice?" Rebecca unfolded a letter with careful hands. "They suspect unusual trade patterns. Some shipments have been delayed or rerouted. Officials are asking questions, subtle at first, but increasingly pointed." Armand tapped the table, thoughtful. "Our network is strong, but strength invites scrutiny. We must anticipate their moves and counteract without revealing ourselves." Across the harbor, European spies moved like shadows, infiltrating taverns, warehouses, and shipyards. Lafitte, once a pirate and now a merchant in appearance, sent cryptic messages to the French, hinting at opportunities to exploit Armand's operations. The stakes had escalated from trade to survival, from influence to power. Armand acted decisively. He introduced layers of misdirection, decoy shipments laden with low-value goods, false letters meant to be intercepted, and multiple courier routes designed to confuse any observer. Each maneuver was calculated to expose betrayal, protect core assets, and maintain the integrity of the network. Yet betrayal came from an unexpected quarter. A trusted colonial contact, motivated by greed and coerced by French agents, attempted to disclose the location of a key cache along the New England coast. Armand's intelligence caught the breach before any critical loss occurred. He acted swiftly, recalling the cache, redirecting shipments, and neutralizing the threat without alerting others. The incident was a stark reminder. Espionage was a living game, one in which loyalty was provisional and vigilance was eternal. Armand began implementing a rigorous verification system for all contacts. Couriers were rotated, communications were double encoded, and meetings were scheduled with calculated unpredictability. Even allies were tested, their reactions closely observed to ensure alignment with the greater strategy. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, shifts in the Mughal court added layers of complexity. Factions within the empire, vying for influence and favor, sent conflicting intelligence that could mislead or empower European traders. Armand skillfully navigated these streams of information, using subtle manipulation to maintain access to priority shipments, intelligence, and strategic guidance. In one daring operation, Armand coordinated the movement of a highly sensitive cargo, manuscripts detailing trade networks, celestial charts, and rare fabrics from Boston to New York. He used multiple ships, some carrying decoy cargo, others moving in secrecy along hidden coves. Couriers carried coded letters, each with layers of encryption designed to expose any breach. By the time the cargo reached its destination, rival agents had been misled, intercepted letters revealed nothing of substance, and Armand's network remained intact. Yet danger was ever present. A sudden storm near Cape Cod threatened one of the vessels carrying critical intelligence. Waves towered over the deck, Wind tore at sails, and crew members fought to secure cargo. Armand coordinated from the horizon, issuing precise instructions, anticipating the ship's movements, and ensuring the survival of both men and goods. By dawn, the vessel had weathered the storm, its treasures and intelligence intact, a testament to careful planning and adaptability. Even within the colonies, suspicion simmered. Colonial officials, curious merchants, and rival agents scrutinized movements, seeking anomalies that might indicate hidden networks. Armand countered with subtlety. Every meeting was clandestine, every shipment coded, and every alliance tested continuously. Trust was never absolute. Loyalty was earned through repeated demonstration and careful observation. In the midst of this tense environment, Armand convened a critical council with his closest allies. The room was small, hidden in a townhouse near the harbor, lanterns casting flickering light over maps and letters. "The French are relentless," Armand said, voice steady. "We must anticipate their next moves, but the key is patience. We do not act rashly. Instead, we observe, gather intelligence, and strike when opportunity presents itself." Rebecca pointed to a map marked with ciphers. "We can manipulate their perception. By planting decoys and sending false intelligence, we can lead them into traps without ever revealing ourselves." Ezekiel added, "And what of our allies? Some may be tempted by promises of gold or titles from rival powers." Armand's eyes were sharp. "We will test every ally. Any deviation, any hint of betrayal will be addressed immediately. This network is stronger than any single individual. It must remain so." The following weeks tested every skill Armand had cultivated. French agents attempted to intercept shipments, rival European merchants probed for weaknesses, and colonial officials questioned unusual trade patterns. Each challenge was met with precision. Decoy routes, encrypted communications, and controlled leaks exposed the spies' methods while safeguarding core operations. In a final act of strategy, Armand orchestrated a complex exchange of letters and cargo between New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Each step was monitored, each courier vetted, and each letter encoded in layers of ciphers. By the operation's conclusion, the European rivals had been misled, critical intelligence had reached its intended recipients, and the network had emerged stronger, its resilience proven. As winter approached, Armand reflected on the shadows of conspiracy that had tested him. Betrayal, intrigue, and espionage were constant companions, yet through vigilance, strategy, and foresight, he had maintained the integrity of his operations. The colonies remained connected to India, trade continued, and ideas flowed, shaping thought, commerce, and influence across continents. Standing on a balcony overlooking Boston Harbor, Armand considered the delicate balance of power he maintained. European empires maneuvered openly, yet the true force shaping events was unseen, a network of trade, intelligence, and influence orchestrated from the shadows. Each decision, each letter, each alliance carried weight beyond immediate comprehension, rippling across continents and generations. In the quiet of the night, Armand Qureshi penned a final set of letters sealed with his personal sigil and entrusted them to his most reliable couriers. Each carried intelligence, guidance, and subtle direction, reinforcing the network and ensuring that even amidst conspiracies, his influence remained pervasive and secure. History, he knew, was often shaped not by those who wielded armies in plain sight, but by those who moved unseen, orchestrating events through patience, strategy, and the quiet manipulation of knowledge and trust. And in that shadowed dance of conspiracy,
Armand Qureshi had proven himself not merely a merchant, but a master of influence, unseen yet indispensable, shaping the destiny of worlds from behind the curtain.
The Eastern Legacy. Winter had melted into spring, and the harbors of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia bustled with activity, the streets alive with commerce and conversation. Ships carried not only goods, but ideas, manuscripts, and subtle influence, their sails a silent testimony to the network Armand Qureshi had painstakingly built. From the palaces of Agra to the cobblestone streets of the colonies, Armand's vision of connection was unfolding, quiet yet transformative. The Eastern legacy he nurtured was multi-layered. On one level, it manifested in trade. Rare spices, silks, and textiles flowed from India to the colonies, creating markets previously unimaginable. Colonial merchants, scholars, and artisans adapted these goods to local needs, incorporating new techniques, tastes, and designs into their daily lives. Yet beneath the visible commerce lay subtler currents, the exchange of ideas, strategies, and knowledge that would leave a lasting imprint. In Philadelphia, Armand convened a gathering of colonial thinkers under the guise of a trade meeting. Among them were young leaders, artisans, and scholars eager to learn from foreign methods. Armand shared administrative techniques from the Mughal Empire, emphasizing efficiency, resource allocation, and negotiation. Structure, he explained, is the foundation, but understanding human behavior, trust, ambition, and restraint is the key to true influence. These lessons, couched in discussions about trade and organization, were absorbed quietly. To the casual observer, Armand was merely a merchant introducing exotic goods and knowledge, yet the implications were profound. Colonial leaders began to adopt subtle methods of administration, negotiation, and strategic planning inspired by his insights. Elsewhere, the cultural impact was tangible. Artisans incorporated Indian weaving techniques into textiles. Architects borrowed elements of symmetry and ornamentation, and culinary influences subtly transformed local kitchens. Manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy, transported secretly across oceans, inspired scholars to question, experiment, and innovate. Through trade, knowledge, and mentorship, Armand had begun to infuse the colonies with an Eastern perspective that complemented European influence, creating a unique synthesis. Political influence, too, was expanding. Armand maintained communication with key colonial figures, advising on logistics, intelligence gathering, and strategic planning. His insights, drawn from the Mughal model of governance, emphasized the importance of networks, loyalty, and foresight. Leaders began to consider not just local challenges, but global connections, trade routes, and strategic alliances. Meanwhile, European rivals continued their maneuvers, seeking to disrupt Armand's operations, but the resilience of his network, carefully cultivated alliances, coded communications, and secure caches ensured that his influence remained intact. By turning threats into learning opportunities, Armand reinforced the durability of the system he had built, proving that knowledge and strategy could outweigh brute force or wealth alone. A key aspect of this legacy was education. Armand arranged for manuscripts and texts to reach schools and private scholars, often under the pretense of trade documents. Topics ranged from celestial navigation and mathematics to political philosophy and economic strategy. By exposing young leaders and thinkers to Eastern ideas, he ensured that the seeds of innovation and critical thought would continue to grow long after any single shipment reached its destination. In New York, Armand supervised the creation of a hidden archive of rare manuscripts and maps, accessible only to trusted members of his network. This repository contained knowledge from India, Europe, and the colonies themselves, information on trade routes, political movements, and cultural practices. The archive became both a tool and a symbol, the embodiment of his strategy to connect continents, shape thought, and preserve influence. Commerce and diplomacy intertwined seamlessly under his guidance. Alliances with colonial merchants, European traders, and Indian contacts were continuously refined, tested, and reinforced. Strategic shipments served multiple purposes: material wealth, intelligence transfer, and the subtle reinforcement of loyalty. Every act, no matter how mundane, was a component of a larger plan.
In Boston, a young merchant named Elias Whitmore demonstrated the tangible effects of Armand's influence. Using techniques learned from Indian trade practices, Elias optimized his distribution networks, expanded markets, and introduced new goods to the colonies. His success, while seemingly independent, was directly connected to Armand's guidance, illustrating the invisible hand shaping events from afar. Armand also recognized the importance of information flow. Secret letters, coded messages, and couriers ensured that intelligence moved faster than ships, often influencing decisions before rivals could react. He monitored rival European agents, intercepted attempts at sabotage, and redirected operations with precision. The mastery of information, he knew, was as critical as mastery of trade. Yet perhaps the most enduring aspect of the Eastern legacy was intangible: the blending of cultures, the cross-pollination of ideas, and the quiet expansion of perspectives. Colonial leaders, scholars, and merchants, exposed to Indian knowledge, philosophy, and techniques, began to think beyond traditional European frameworks. In subtle ways, Armand was fostering adaptability, innovation, and a capacity for strategic thinking that would influence generations. As spring gave way to summer, Armand reflected on the network he had built. Ships carried goods and letters across oceans, merchants moved with purpose, scholars studied foreign texts, and leaders incorporated new strategies into governance and commerce. His influence had become a current beneath the surface of colonial life, visible only to those who knew where to look, yet shaping events in profound ways. Standing on the docks of Philadelphia, watching the sunlight glint off the masts of departing ships, Armand felt the weight of his achievements. The Eastern legacy was secure, not as a monument of wealth or power, but as a living, evolving network of influence connecting continents, ideas, and people. Trade, intelligence, and cultural exchange had become instruments of subtle transformation, demonstrating the true impact often lies in the invisible threads connecting worlds. By the end of the season, Armand had achieved what few could: a system of commerce and intelligence that transcended geography, a network resilient to betrayal and espionage, and an enduring influence on the colony's politics and economy. The seeds of innovation, strategic thought, and cross-cultural understanding had been sown, promising a future shaped by insight, foresight, and quiet guidance. In the twilight, as lanterns reflected on the harbor waters, Armand Qureshi prepared for the next stage of his vision. The colonies were changing, not through armies or decrees, but through trade, knowledge, and the silent architecture of influence he had constructed. The Eastern legacy was no longer a dream. It was a living force, shaping the new world in ways that few could yet comprehend, and ensuring that the threads of connection he had woven would endure far beyond his own lifetime.
The crossroads of fate. The dawn of a crisp autumn morning brought a golden haze over Philadelphia, but beneath the serene streets, currents of tension and opportunity surged unseen. Armand Qureshi walked along the riverfront, the cries of merchants blending with the distant sounds of dock workers loading and unloading crates.
Ships lined the harbor, their masts like silent sentinels, each carrying wealth, intelligence, and potential peril. For years, Armand had orchestrated trade, espionage, and cultural influence between India and the New World. Now, the culmination of his efforts approached a pivotal moment. Rival European powers, sensing both opportunity and threat, moved decisively. The English, French, and Portuguese competed to dominate trade routes, intercept shipments, and influence colonial leadership. Every move, every misstep, could cascade into consequences felt across continents. Armand convened a secret council in a modest townhouse near the harbor. Lanterns flickered across tables strewn with maps, letters, and coded instructions. Rebecca Sinclair, Ezekiel Hawthorne, and a small cadre of trusted merchants and scholars awaited his instructions. "The European powers are consolidating," Armand began, voice steady but firm. "The French are strengthening their intelligence networks in Boston and Newport. The English are probing our shipments and seeking to identify our cachets. Even our most trusted colonial allies are being tested by opportunity and fear." Ezekiel leaned over a map, tracing the routes of ships with his finger. "We can continue decoy shipments, but their coordination is improving. They anticipate misdirection more quickly now." Armand nodded. "Then we escalate subtly. We reinforce our network, deepen loyalty, and diversify operations. Every shipment, every letter, every alliance must serve multiple purposes: material wealth, intelligence, and verification of trust." The plan was meticulous. Shipments would travel via multiple routes with decoys and false manifests designed to mislead European agents. Couriers rotated constantly, using encrypted messages to maintain communication. Hidden cachets were moved, destroyed, or replaced to test for infiltration. The network was a living organism, adapting in real time to threats and opportunities. At the same time, Armand leveraged his connections in India. Letters from Surat and Delhi provided intelligence on rival European activities in Asia, allowing him to anticipate the arrival of ships, shifts in cargo priorities, and strategic moves by competing merchants. By integrating information across oceans, Armand maintained an advantage that few could rival. Yet it was not only intelligence and trade that defined this crossroads. Armand's influence had permeated the colonies culturally and intellectually. Manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and governance had reached scholars and leaders in secret. These ideas, subtly integrated into discussions, debates, and planning, were beginning to shape colonial thinking, creating leaders who considered strategy, logistics, and diplomacy with a perspective previously unseen.
In Boston, Armand orchestrated a complex exchange of intelligence and cultural knowledge. Coded letters carried strategic insights, while rare manuscripts were hidden among ordinary shipments of textiles and spices. Couriers navigated narrow streets, secret alleys, and coastal coves to ensure safe delivery. European agents intercepting decoy shipments found only mundane goods, their efforts rendered fruitless. Amidst this intricate web, a convergence of rivalries loomed. Lafitte, the former pirate turned opportunistic merchant, coordinated with French agents in an attempt to disrupt Armand's operations. Simultaneously, English traders probed for weaknesses, seeking to compromise alliances and intercept critical information. The colonies had become a chessboard, with ships, merchants, and intelligence acting as pieces, moved carefully toward a decisive turning point. Armand responded with precision. He arranged a series of shipments designed to converge simultaneously in multiple ports, creating controlled exposure for rivals while reinforcing loyalty among trusted allies. Each operation had layers: a decoy shipment, a genuine cargo, and a coded letter verifying the integrity of the network. By manipulating perception, he ensured that rivals acted according to the designs he anticipated. The culmination came during a tense week in late autumn. A critical shipment of rare textiles and manuscripts from India approached Boston. European spies monitored the harbor, expecting to intercept it. Armand had anticipated this. The shipment traveled under multiple flags, split into 3 vessels, each carrying decoys and genuine cargo. Couriers carried letters in code, coordinating the timing and movement of each piece. By nightfall, all 3 vessels reached their intended destinations, unnoticed by rivals, their contents intact, and the network's integrity verified. The success was more than a tactical victory, it was a statement. Armand's influence, commercial, cultural, and intellectual, had reached a level where it could withstand the concerted efforts of multiple empires. The colonies, connected subtly to India through trade, ideas, and strategy, had become a theater of influence where knowledge and foresight outweighed raw power. Yet Armand understood the fragility of this achievement. Every ally had been tested, every shipment scrutinized, and every courier verified. The network's survival depended on vigilance, adaptability, and the constant anticipation of betrayal. He knew that history often hinged on those prepared to navigate complexity, manage uncertainty, and act decisively when opportunity arose. Beyond commerce and intelligence, Armand reflected on the cultural and intellectual legacy he had nurtured. Colonial leaders, scholars, and merchants now possessed knowledge from India and the Mughal Empire, administrative techniques, trade strategies, architectural insights, and scientific knowledge. These elements, though subtle, were transforming thinking, encouraging innovation, and fostering strategic foresight that would resonate long after individual shipments or letters had been delivered. Standing on the deck of a ship bound for New York, Armand watched the harbor fade into the distance. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before him, a conduit for commerce, intelligence, and culture. He understood that the crossroads of fate were not defined by armies or battles alone, but by the careful orchestration of influence across continents. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the waters in gold and crimson, Armand penned the final set of letters for the season. They carried intelligence, guidance, and philosophical insight, tools to shape the next phase of colonial development. Couriers were entrusted with their safe passage, ships prepared for simultaneous departure, and coded messages arranged to verify loyalty and integrity. By nightfall, all 3 vessels reached their intended destinations, unnoticed by rivals, their contents intact, and the network's integrity verified. In that moment, Armand Qureshi understood the full scope of his work. He had transformed trade into a vehicle of influence, espionage into a tool of strategic foresight, and cultural exchange into a foundation for innovation. The colonies, linked invisibly to India, were poised on the threshold of change, politically, intellectually, and economically. History, he realized, was rarely the product of a single empire or leader. It was the result of networks, ideas, and foresight, orchestrated by those willing to navigate shadows, anticipate rivalries, and act with precision. And in this convergence of fate, Armand had ensured that his legacy, Eastern knowledge, strategic influence, and cultural enrichment would endure, shaping the new world in ways invisible yet profound.
The Silent Architect. Winter had settled over the colonies once more, coating the harbors of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia in frost. The streets were quieter now, yet beneath the seeming calm, the web Armand Qureshi had woven stretched taut and unseen, connecting continents, cultures, and minds. Ships moved with purpose, letters carried coded insight, and merchants and scholars acted, often unknowingly, under the influence of a silent hand.
Armin stood on the balcony of a townhouse overlooking the Delaware River, his eyes tracing the gentle movements of the ships below. For years he had bridged oceans, navigated espionage, and fostered alliances, shaping not just trade but thought, innovation, and strategy. His mission had been both material and intellectual, to connect India's knowledge and resources with the evolving colonies of North America, and to cultivate influence that could endure beyond empires. He reflected on the decades of meticulous planning. Every shipment of silks, spices, or manuscripts had been deliberate. Every coded letter, every hidden cache, and every meeting of allies and scholars had contributed to a larger architecture of influence. While kings, governors, and empires competed openly, Armin had acted quietly, orchestrating events from the shadows. In that silence, he had become the invisible architect of change. The colonies themselves were evolving. Merchants who had learned new trade techniques from India expanded their reach. Scholars who had studied manuscripts now debated ideas in taverns, academies, and private homes. Artisans integrated Eastern aesthetics and methods into local crafts. Administrators adopted lessons in strategy, organization, and resource management. The seeds of knowledge had taken root, and their growth would continue independently, carrying the imprint of Armin's guidance. Yet influence was never a solitary pursuit. Armin had depended on loyal allies, Rebecca Sinclair, Ezekiel Hawthorne, trusted couriers, and discreet merchants. Each had played a role in preserving the network, safeguarding intelligence, and ensuring that the flow of goods and knowledge remained uninterrupted. Their dedication had turned potential vulnerability into strength, their vigilance transforming complexity into stability. Armin understood that the measure of true influence was subtlety. Open displays of power or wealth could invite envy, suspicion, or aggression. The strength of a network, he knew, lay in invisibility, resilience, and adaptability. By remaining unseen, he allowed ideas to permeate, knowledge to spread, and trust to develop naturally. His legacy, unlike that of kings and generals, would not be written in monuments or battlefields, but in the lives and minds of those touched by his efforts. The final test of the network arrived in the form of escalating tensions among European powers. English, French, and Portuguese agents attempted to assert dominance over trade routes, gather intelligence, and co-opt colonial allies. Armin's response was decisive yet understated. Simultaneous shipments, encrypted communications, and subtle verification of loyalties ensured that his influence remained secure. Decoys misled spies, coded letters revealed traitors, and trusted allies executed precise operations that maintained the integrity of the network. Beyond these immediate challenges, Armin considered the long-term impact of his work. The colonies, connected through commerce, culture, and knowledge to distant India, were developing a resilience that transcended any single empire. Ideas, methods, and strategic thinking had been introduced quietly, yet they were taking root, shaping the decisions of leaders, the ambitions of merchants, and the pursuits of scholars.
In a quiet meeting with Samuel Adams and a circle of emerging colonial leaders, Armand discussed principles of administration, trade, and foresight. He refrained from revealing the full scope of his network, instead focusing on concepts, trust, adaptability, and strategic thinking. These lessons, delivered with subtlety, provided the leaders with tools that would influence decision-making long after his direct involvement had ended. Meanwhile, cultural influence continued to unfold. Artisans produced textiles with Indian-inspired designs. Architects adopted patterns of symmetry and proportion, and scholars incorporated Eastern methods into mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Even cuisine and everyday commerce carried echoes of distant lands.
Through these channels, Armand's vision had transformed tangible aspects of life, embedding his influence into the colony's very fabric. As spring approached, Armand reflected on the journey that had brought him from the courts of Agra to the bustling ports of the New World. The path had been fraught with peril. Pirates, storms, rival empires, and potential betrayal had tested his resolve. Yet every challenge had been met with strategy, foresight, and the silent coordination of allies. By blending commerce, intelligence, and culture, he had created a legacy both resilient and enduring. He also understood that history would remember some events and figures while overlooking others. The kings, generals, and governors would appear in chronicles and treaties, yet the silent architect, the orchestrator of networks, ideas, and influence, would remain largely invisible. And that, Armand realized, was precisely how true change was often achieved. Influence unrecognized is influence unchallenged, and unchallenged influence endures. In the harbor, ships prepared for new voyages, carrying textiles, manuscripts, and letters. Couriers moved with precise timing, ensuring the continued flow of knowledge and intelligence. Armand watched, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. The Eastern legacy he had nurtured, commerce, culture, and intellectual influence, was established, resilient to rivals, and poised to shape the future of the colonies. As dusk fell, the lanterns reflected on the Delaware River, casting golden paths across the water. Armand penned the final letters of the season, sealing them with care. Each letter carried guidance, insight, and verification protocols, ensuring that the network would remain cohesive and effective. With each seal, he reinforced not only the operational integrity of his network, but also the enduring influence of his vision. Standing alone on the balcony, Armand considered the broader impact of his work. He had bridged continents, connected cultures, and introduced knowledge in ways both subtle and profound. The colonies were more than trading posts. They were emerging centers of innovation, strategic thought, and cultural synthesis. His influence, though unseen by most, would ripple across generations, guiding decisions, shaping commerce, and inspiring minds. The legacy of Armand Qureshi, the silent architect, was now complete. Not written in stone or commemorated in statues, it was embedded in the commerce, culture, and intellect of the colonies. Trade networks thrived, ideas spread, and knowledge endured, all linked by the careful orchestration of one man who understood the power of subtlety, foresight, and influence. In the quiet of the night, as stars reflected on the river and the hum of the harbor slowed to a gentle rhythm, Armand allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The oceans he had crossed, the networks he had built, and the influence he had cultivated were all part of a vision larger than any one empire or ruler. It was a vision of connection, resilience, and enduring impact, a legacy not of conquest, but of the silent, persistent shaping of history itself. And so, in the shadows of empires, on the shores of a continent yet to claim its independence, Armand Qureshi remained unseen but indelible, the silent architect of a legacy that would endure, whispered across oceans, embedded in minds, and carried forward in the currents of commerce, culture, and knowledge.